Welcome to the Utah Retirement System's webinar series. While this webinar has been pre-recorded, the information is still relevant. Please see the description below for links to the different sections within the video and other helpful information. We hope you find this webinar to be a useful resource in your retirement planning.
The 401k option, this is for everyone, just so we're all on the same page, in the Tier 2 system, meaning you were hired first time ever sometime after July 2011, and maybe you've already made that choice because you've been working for your agency for a couple years, or maybe you're still within your first year and have a choice and just want some more information on the 401k option. But we're not going to talk so much about the choice today. We're just going to focus specifically on the 401k option in the Tier 2 system. To put things kind of in perspective, just to sort of give you a big picture real quickly, there's kind of this concept sometimes in the financial planning world that we kind of want to get our financial houses in order. And there's a few key factors or variables that we all deal with that can help make our financial lives happier, smoother, more enjoyable, however you want to say that. So just to give you kind of that big picture perspective, one of the concepts is this idea of insurance. We all need insurance, let's say, for health purposes, right? So if we have an illness or something like that, or we drive a car, we want auto insurance. We have a home, we want homeowners insurance. So, if the home burns down, most of us just don't have tens of thousands of dollars sitting around to, say, repair a car in an accident or rebuild a house, and that's why you have insurance. And that's just one of those fundamental principles that we all hopefully will have in place to one degree or another to make sure that our overall financial health is pretty sound. Another key component is a spending plan. We all have limited resources, so we have to make choices in terms of how we spend our money. And hopefully we align the way we spend our money with our priorities. Of course, one of those priorities could be saving for retirement. That'll be the focus of what we'll talk about today. Speaking of retirement, retirement, savings, education, those are sort of two longer-term goals. Again, and they may, depending on your circumstances, they may be more or less important to you. But having those pieces in place, again, is part of that sound financial house concept. And then somewhere in there, and there's different debates in terms of the different priorities here, but it's debt management. Do we have a lot of credit card debt, student loan debt, because debt affects our spending plan because we've basically committed a certain amount of our resources towards debt payments. And obviously, if we're spending more on repaying student loans or credit cards, that leaves us less to spend on other priorities like perhaps retirement savings or education fund for college purposes. So again, just sort of the big picture idea is to give you this sense of these are a lot of the sort of the basic key financial 101 components to basically having any financial house in good order. And then we're going to focus primarily today on the retirement savings piece. As we think about that retirement savings piece, though, and as we think about our spending plans, there are just a couple thoughts real quickly before we dive in deep. If we get some of those big purchases right, and typically for most of us that's going to be a home, or maybe renting a place, as well as car purchases. And I know it's sort of from my own past experience, a lot of times if you want to buy a house or something like that, lenders, realtors will, in essence, a lot of times try to get us to, buy the biggest house, in essence, that we can afford. What's our maximum monthly payment? And there are rules, guidelines that they have to determine how much of a monthly payment we can put towards a mortgage. Same thing with cars, sometimes you go to the car dealership and you hear questions like, well, what's the maximum monthly payment you can afford? If we can stop and before we get into buying the home or buying the next new car, and really think for just a second about, well, what's a reasonable amount to spend on a home or a reasonable amount to spend per month on a car, that pause can help us then make us think through, well, you know what, maybe I don't need the $1,500 a month mortgage and, whatever size house that, maybe I'm good with a $1,300 a month mortgage. Well, that extra $200, maybe that's now I can use to put towards some of my other priorities like retirement savings or college education. But just from research in the financial planning industry and from talking to our members, a lot of times what we find out is that those two big purchases, a home, a car, if we can get those from, instead of being, say, the max we can afford, down to something a little more reasonable that still meets our needs, that makes it so much easier to have resources available for other priorities like home or like saving for retirement and whatever other your goals might happen to be. So just a little food for thought there. All right, focusing specifically on retirement then. The idea is eventually we plan to retire and we're going to want to try and replace a certain amount of whatever income we're making now down the road in retirement. And the way we replace that income, it can come from several different sources. It could come from Social Security. If your agency pays into Social Security, most agencies in the URS system do. If you see FICA, FICA listed on your pay stub, for instance, you're paying into Social Security. Savings plans, such as a 401k, which we're going to focus on today, that can also be a great source of retirement income, but it could also include other types like IRAs. If you're in the school systems, maybe a 403b, or if you have a spouse in the school system. There are other types of saving plans, IRAs. They all, though, essentially work the same way. They help us replace retirement income. And then there's, of course, other ways to replace income in retirement. Maybe you have rental income, or maybe you'll work part-time. Those can also be additional sources of retirement income. But big picture, the other concept is we're saving for retirement now because eventually down the road, we want to be able to replace a certain percentage of our income so that we can live the rest of our lives in retirement, hopefully comfortably. So we have this concept of sort of retirement stability. And again, the idea is retirement resources or income can come from several different sources. Traditionally, if you hear financial planners, retirement advisors, they'll talk about sort of the three-legged stool, which is usually some type of pension income, which is lifetime income, maybe Social Security, and then our own savings plans, IRAs, 401ks, etc. In the Tier 2 401k system, essentially, assuming you have, say, work your entire career in a URS covered agency, meaning, city, county, state, school, something like that, you're going to wind up in essence sort of with a two-legged stool, if that makes sense. You're going to have Social Security, again, assuming you're paying into Social Security, as well as your 401k. And so it's really important because you have just, say, those two legs that, you actively monitor and manage the 401k carefully. And that's what we're going to focus in on today. Now, I know sometimes, too, we get questions about, well, Social Security, is it going to be there, by the time I retire? So here's a little poll question for you. So if you will, just give us your thoughts. It can either be your own personal opinion or maybe what you've heard. Do you think Social Security is going to be there by the time you retire? So I'll give you just a couple seconds. See what you think about that. All right, just another second or two. Is it going to be there? Yay or nay? Well, it looks like most of you, other than the three of you who are going to be abducted by aliens, it looks like most of us think it's going to be there, but the majority are saying it's probably going to be reduced. So just FYI right now, if you do go out and look at your Social Security statement, you can go to ssa.gov and actually download your Social Security statement. I think it's on the third page. You will see a little disclaimer on there that basically says by 2034, if Congress doesn't make any changes to the system, we'll get about 80% of whatever our benefit should be. So at least according to the Social Security actuaries, they're basically saying, no, we think Social Security will be there. It's just going to be at a reduced benefit. Now, that's 14 years away, so who knows? We'll see. Stay tuned. But theoretically, that's what they're saying for now. All right, focusing on the 401k itself. Good news, in the 401k system, your employer is giving you 10% of your salary to put into the 401k, and that is 10% on top of your salary. So if you're making $2,000 a month, let's say, in essence, your employer is giving you an extra $200 a month that's going to go into the 401k for you. It is not a match. It's not anything like that. If you don't do anything at all, you get it regardless. So compared, for instance, to the private sector, that's actually a pretty dang nice benefit, because to get a 10% contribution just for showing up for work is pretty much unheard of, particularly in the private sector. So it is one of the really nice benefits you have for being in the Tier 2 system. That leads to the question of, okay, well, that's great. My employer's going to put that money away. So how much might I receive by the time I get to retirement? What's it going to be worth? So here's another question for you. What kind of factors do you think might affect how much your 401k could be worth down the road? So there's kind of no right answer to this, but I just kind of want to get a sense from you guys. What's going to determine what factors are going to affect the size of your 401k down the road? So just type in whatever answers you want, and we will talk through some of those real quickly. No doubt there are a lot of different ideas. So we're seeing things like the stock market, how much money's going in, our contributions, inflation, how much we ourselves put in, true, yep. How long I'm going to be in the system, yep, all those things can affect it. Interesting, good stuff. Okay, great, thank you guys. So just one quick observation, there are things to invest in besides the stock market. And I know a lot of times that's what we sort of associate with 401ks, but there are other types of investments too. There's a bond market, there are international bond markets, there's real estate, commodities, there's a lot of different investment options. All right, so let's just sum up real quickly though. Contributions while you're working, yeah, big factor. And that can come from our employer, but it can also come from us as the employees, because we can also contribute to the 401k. Another big one, investment performance, and we'll focus in on this a little bit too. How fast or how slow our money grows while we're saving for retirement, that can certainly affect that ultimate balance. And then here's the other one. Once you get to retirement, and I didn't see this one particularly listed, but maybe somebody did, how long you want the money to last in retirement. You know, obviously, if you want it to last for fewer years, you could probably spend more of it, but if you want it to last for more years, you're not going to be able to spend quite as much of it. So that can also affect how much you'll have down the road in retirement as well. So here's a simple example on the savings side. So while I'm working, I'm saving for retirement. Let's pretend I'm going to, work for, say, 35 years. Maybe I'm 25 years old today. 35 years later, I'm age 60. Here's my example. I'm making $40,000. I'm in the 401k. My employer's been putting that 10% away. Depending on these different rates of return, in this example, I potentially have somewhere between 400,000 or 900,000 plus in my 401k. That's some seriously big money. And again, depending on these different rates of return, which we'll focus on in a little bit, I could have higher amounts or lower amounts, and there are pros and cons that come along with them. But a couple things to point out to you. Those early years, for instance, say those first, roughly 19 years or so, it takes a long time before those dollars start to become really significant. So in this little example, for instance, on the green line, it took almost 19 years before you hit the 200,000 mark. Then maybe another 8-9 years later, you've gained another 200,000. Well, that next section, that happened a lot more quickly. And then maybe just another 4 or 5 years, we got another 200,000. So the takeaway from this graph, there's a couple things to take away. One is the early years, it may feel like you're making just sort of slow progress towards building that, quote, big retirement account balance. So hang in there. That's kind of the message. Don't give up. It takes time. But in those later years, that's when you see these account values potentially really, really ramp up quickly. It's kind of like, imagine going to a ski resort, you're at the top of a ski run. If you drop a softball size snowball into the ground, it's not going to be very big at the beginning, but by the time it gets to the bottom of the run, it is a monster. And we see that same type of principle at work here. It's this idea that the more time you have, the faster that money will grow, but particularly it grows in those later years. So hang in there. And the other message is, depending again on how you have your money invested, it can be growing faster or slower. And we'll focus more on that in a bit. That's on the saving side, the working years. What about once you're in retirement? A couple takeaways from this slide. So again, we see the different rates of return, 4%, 6%, 8%. Observation number one, if I have higher rates of return even while I'm in retirement, that means I can spend more money. I'll have more money to spend. The other observation, though, depending on how long I want that money to last, that can affect how much I'm going to have. So for instance, if I'm on the left side, if I think, well, I just need this money to last 20 years, for whatever reason. I'm age 65, think I'll be lucky to make it to age 85. Great, I can spend, a lot more money than say if I'm looking at a 25-year payout period in retirement, which is over on the right-hand side. So again, those two factors, how fast is my money growing even while I'm in retirement, and then how long do I want the money to last? Those are a couple factors that are going to affect how much you're going to receive in retirement. Now, when can you take money out of your 401k? In other words, all right, so eventually I'm going to retire someday. What are the rules for that? Well, anytime you separate from service, you can take money out of your 401k. So if you're 40 years old and you change jobs, change employers, you could potentially take money out of your 401k. Once you're past 59 and a half, whether you're working or not, you can also take money out of your 401k, which is kind of nice. So even if you're still working, say at 62, and you want to take some money out to go take a trip around the world, you could do it even though you're working. Now, there is potentially a 10% early withdrawal penalty if you are under age 59 and a half. So back to the 40-year-old example. I'm 40 years old, I change jobs. Can I get at my 401k? Yep, I can. I will pay state and federal income tax, and because I'm under 59 and a half, I'm going to have to pay a 10% penalty on top of it. And that penalty is there. That's the IRS's way of saying you really shouldn't be touching this money until you're 59 and a half, basically, closer to a retirement age. Are there ways around the penalty? Well, there are. Obviously, one we just talked about, be at least 59 and a half before you take money out. Here's a little exception to that rule. If you're at least age 55 when you quit or retire, separate from service, if you're at least age 55 when that happens, that also negates the 10% penalty. So the normal rule, got to be 59 and a half, but if I'm, say, 56 and I stop working, change jobs, whatever, at that point, I can take money out of my 401k without the 10% penalty. If I'm, say, 52 and I stop working, and then I wait until I'm 56, let's say, and I take money out at that point, do I get out of the 10% penalty? The answer is no. You have to be at least 55 when you stop working, retire, whatever you want to say, in order to avoid the penalty. So keep that in the back of your mind too. If you say you got started at 22, for instance, and you're now 52, you've been doing this for 30 years, you're like, this is long enough. Well, you might want to work another couple years just to get you to that age 55 so that you can tap your 401k without that 10% penalty. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait till 59 and a half. One other exception, disability. So if ever you're disabled, you can also take money out of your 401k in that case. And again, with all of these, you always pay state and federal income tax, assuming you're, say, here in Utah, paying state income tax. We're only talking about how you avoid the penalty. So there are ways to avoid the penalty, but these are always subject to state and federal income tax. Now, another principle with putting money into 401ks, again, is time. And we sort of touched on this earlier. So here's a couple examples. Let's look at Julie here in the red line. So Julie's age 25. She's going to, go 35, 40 years here. And by the time she gets ready to retire, because she's been putting away 15%, she's got over $1 million in her 401k. She's invested a total of 282,000. She got about a million, a little over a million in there. So basically her money almost quadrupled. The big thing that worked for her was the fact that she started at age 25. Now, you may look at the 15% and think, 15, who can do 15%? Well, it's 15%. It doesn't matter where it's coming from. So, let's say she's working for a U.S. employer. She's in the 401k plan. She's getting 10% in the 401k from her employer. She adds an extra 5 herself. She's got 15 overall. So she winds up with over $1 million. Sally, on the other hand, waits 10 years to get started. Now, why would she wait? Well, maybe she's got student loans to pay off. Maybe she's gotten married or is buying a house, buying a car, kind of all the things you do when you're first sort of starting out. And it just takes a while before you feel like, well, now I'm ready to really start saving for retirement. Sally, too, though, invests 15%. She's doing the same thing. She winds up with over 600,000, and that's not too shabby. But if you'll notice, those 10 years, basically it cost Sally 400,000 bucks. So basically it's like in essence, she's given up or lost 40,000 a year. So that's a big hit for waiting. So main takeaway from this slide, start sooner rather than later. Get going as soon as you can. And again, in the Tier 2 401k plan, the nice thing is you start from day one, essentially, assuming your employer puts you in right away. You're good to go at that point. So time, another big factor, another big success factor. Start sooner rather than later. Now, Sally and Julie were doing 5%. So the question now is, how much should you save towards your 401k on your own? So let me ask you guys, how much do you think you should save towards retirement? 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10, have no clue. What do you guys think is kind of a good rule of thumb in terms of how much you should be saving towards retirement? Well, it looks like the majority of you are saying 10+% or more. Yeah, I would say that's probably pretty true as a general rule. In fact, the more the merrier. And I can tell you, here at URS, we retire folks every day, and no one has come through yet and said, I have too much money saved for retirement. So knowing that doesn't seem to be possible, feel free to save more. Here's some general guidelines. Conventional wisdom would say somewhere in that 15 to 20% range overall. But it depends, right? There are specific factors. Depends on how old you are, how much of that income you want to replace in retirement. Do you want to replace 80% or 90 or 100%? Do you have any existing account balances? Maybe you worked in the private sector and have an old 401k, or maybe you have IRAs. All of those factors can affect how much you need to be saving towards retirement now. But as I said, just remember, if you go with kind of this conventional wisdom of 15 to 20%, you're already at least halfway there because your employer is putting in 10%. So just if you have some paper nearby, for instance, just make a quick note for yourself. Think about real quickly what your goal is, and 15, 20%, 25, whatever you feel like is going to be appropriate. And write down what you're doing now. Put down, say, 10% because you're getting that from the Tier 2 401k, and then figure out, okay, well, am I at my goal? Am I doing what I want to be doing, or do I need to do something more? Do I need to be making changes? And there's nothing that says you have to get right to whatever your goal is right away, immediately. Yeah, small changes, can work well. Some folks, for instance, will do, they'll just add 1% per year. If you do that 5, 10 years in a row, take 1% more out of your paycheck each year, that doesn't cause a lot of pain to miss 1% per year out of your paycheck, but you do that 5 or 10 years, you're putting away some pretty serious money with not a lot of pain. So different ways of getting there, but the point is, if you're not at your goal where you want to be, start start taking some steps now to get you towards there. And small steps help. Anything you can do will move you forward. If you want to get a sense number-wise of how much your 401k could grow to, we do have a calculator online there at the website, urs.org. If you click on the calculator tab on the main page, and then here in the center, look under the savings plan, you'll want that future value savings plan calculator. You can enter some basic data, what your salary is, how much you're saving, what percentage, you're saving, what percentage your employer, growth rates, all that good stuff. And you can do some what if stuff. And this is a great little tool. It's fun to work with because you can generate some really big numbers. I would caution you though, just be realistic. I wouldn't recommend putting in, a 20% growth rate because there's nothing really out there that does that. I mean, any 1 year maybe, but not over the long term. So just put realistic numbers in there. If you need help with the calculator, by the way, you can call us. We can walk you through how to use the calculator. But that's a handy tool. It's there for you. Take advantage of it. It's a great way to, hopefully inspire yourself to see what kind of dollars you could have down the road. Some general investing principles, if you will. One is, and we say this all the time here at URS, is keep a long-term perspective. Stay the course. So if we look here, this has taken us back into the late 80s, for instance. So over, over say about a 30-year period, there's been a lot of stuff going on in the world. Some stuff's been good, some stuff's been bad, but if you look over these last, 30 plus years, man, the Dow Jones, for instance, 30 years ago was in the 20, whatever that is, 20, the number's pretty small on my screen, 2100-ish range. It's up over 28,000 today. That's a huge run. That's more than a tenfold run. How many of us wish we had some type of time machine where we could go back 15, 10, 20 years ago, whatever, and start investing in the stock market, for instance? So the message here, keep that long-term perspective. Are we going to have crazy months, crazy quarters, even crazy years where things are down? Yep, no doubt it will happen. There'll be all kinds of goofy things happen in the world, wars, tariff wars, political, administrative changes, bad bankruptcies, all those things. Lots of crazy stuff can happen. But the overall trend in the long term, and we're assuming things hopefully will do something similar in the future. Can't guarantee that. But the long-term trend, at least historically, has been stay the course, hang in there, and keep that long-term perspective. It will pay off for you. Another concept to be aware of is the rule of 72. If you haven't heard of this, kind of a fun, simple little rule. It gives you a sense of how long it takes for your money to double. It's very simple to use. Take 72, divide it by whatever rate of return you think your particular investment is going to do, and that'll tell you how long it takes for your money to double. So a couple simple examples. Let's say I start with $1,000 and look at the 3% column. Well, 72 divided by 3 is 24. So I start off with $1,000 today. 24 years from now, it's finally doubled to 2,000. Maybe another 24 years, it finally becomes 4,000. Now I'll go way over to the 7% column. 72 divided by 7, roughly 10. So $1,000 10 years later becomes 2. Another 10 years becomes 4. Another 30 becomes 8. And notice it's doubling each time. It's not going 2,000, 4,000, 6,000. It's 2, 4, 8, 16. That's that snowball effect. More officially titled compound interest, if you've heard of that. But it's just this idea of interest or money growing by earning interest on itself. It's compounding. It's the snowball getting bigger and bigger as time goes by. So takeaway here, higher rates of return helps your money to grow faster, There's caveats with that. We'll talk about that in a bit, but again, that's that general principle. Here's another long-term thought or another key principle, and that is this idea of diversification, not putting all your eggs in one basket. At URS, we have several different individual funds that you can choose from. And what this little, it's almost like a periodic chart almost, if you will, is kind of showing you from year to year which investment did the best for that particular year and which one sort of did the worst. And if you look at this, the trick is to sort of realize, my gosh, there's no pattern here. I can't really look, for instance, at small cap stock fund, which is the orange one, and think, well, that's the one I should always go with because it always does the best. It was in 2010. It was not so great in 2011. So because there's no real pattern here, we would encourage you, instead of putting, say, all your money in just one of these funds, we would say use many of them. The balanced fund, as an example, is a combination of three of the funds: the large cap growth, the large cap value, and the bond fund. And notice it's never the highest performer, but it's also never the lowest performer. It's kind of moving along just right there in the middle. And so by, instead of say having like the small cap stock fund where you could be up really high one year, but boy, you can be down. Look over at 2018, for instance, you have these bigger drops. The idea is by putting your money across different categories, you kind of avoid the big jarring ups as well as the big jarring downs. So you're kind of going sort of that middle of the road. That's the idea of not putting all your eggs in one basket, if you will, or diversification. Now, the nice thing is at URS, you are, by participating in the Tier 2 401k option, you're automatically doing this thing called dollar cost averaging. And that is simply the fact that you're investing a specific either percentage or dollar amount each and every month or each and every pay period into your 401k plan. So, simple example here. Each person here has chosen to put in $100 per month, so total of 500 bucks. Investor A, let's say, has some sort of investment that's $5 a share, and it just never changes in value over these 5 months. So they put $100 in, 5 months later, they got 500 bucks. They put in 500, it's worth 500. But look at investor B, for instance. So investor B is in some type of investment that's kind of bouncing around, actually a pretty significant amount from a percentage standpoint. But, that first month, $100 divided by 5, they get 20 shares. The next month, their investment has fallen down to $3 per share. Well, they're keeping the long-term perspective. They're saying, I'm still going to do my $100 a month. Because now, in essence, that investment is on sale, they pick up more shares. They actually picked up 33 shares. The next month, that investment rebounds back there to $100. It's all right, so they're back to getting their 20 shares. The month after that, boy, the investment's doing really well, but because now it's more expensive and they're still doing their $100 a month, it's not changing, so now they're buying fewer shares. And then month 5 comes along and it's back to $5 a share. Anyway, the point of all that, you can see investor B winds up with $538, investor A, $500. They both invested the same $100 a month. How did B come out $38 ahead? B simply took advantage of the fact that when the share price falls, you wind up buying more shares. And in essence, what you're doing, you're buying more at a low price. And that's kind of the recipe for building wealth. Buy low and then eventually sell high. So let me ask you this question then, because we run into this one all the time too. So when the markets are down, for instance, whatever it happens to be, stocks, bonds, whatever you're in, a lot of times we think, but if you're several years away from retirement and the markets are down, what do you think? Is that good news? Is it bad news? What do you think about it? Give you just another second here. So basically, it looks like we're saying It's either good news or it's so-so. So let me make the case in kind of a illogical, unexpected sort of way. When the markets are down, whatever it is you're investing, it actually is kind of good news because you are buying more shares. And I know maybe in the short term, when you look at your quarterly statement or an annual statement and you're like, wow, I had $10,000 last year, I'm down to 9,000 this year because whatever I was investing in was down. Yeah, that's kind of no fun. But that long-term perspective, 10, 20, 30 years later, you're probably going to look back and think, wow, that was a great time to be buying my investment because it was pretty cheap compared to where it is hopefully going to be in 30 years from now. So, in kind of a crazy reverse logic sort of way, down markets are they're actually kind of good news while you're saving. Now, totally different once you're in retirement, but during the working years, actually, down markets are kind of a good thing because you're getting more and more shares as time goes by. So, question for you: how do you find out, what kind of investor you are? We've looked at, these different rates of return. We had those examples, 4, 6, 8%. If you want to get a sense of how much volatility, meaning how much you're willing to see your investments climb in value versus fall in value, we'd encourage you to take our investor profile questionnaire. When you get a chance, you can log into your MyURS account, click on the Education tab, it's up over on the right-hand side, and then click on the investor profile. It's a short questionnaire, 9, 10 questions, takes maybe 5 minutes. It'll give you couple pieces of information. It'll give you a sense of what type of investor you are. Maybe you're conservative or moderate or aggressive. And it'll also give you a recommended investment choice for it. So if you kind of want to get a sense of, I haven't really done a whole lot with investing maybe in the past, I don't know that much about this stuff, hey, take our little questionnaire, little short survey, and we'll give you some helpful information. The conventional wisdom, the way you should invest, is the more years you have until retirement, the more risk, the more volatility, the more ups and downs, in essence, you want to take. So if you look at this graph, for instance, in the blue there are stocks, traditionally considered the riskier type investments, the ones that can rise really quickly but also fall really quickly. Look at, say, look at 2050. So someone who's planning to retire 2050, 30 years from now, that person's probably, if they follow this little graph, they're going to have, 80+% in stocks. That's a pretty risky mix. Hopefully it's going to generate some high returns. The price to be paid is there going to be probably some big bumps along the way. But stay the course, that mix can work out pretty well for you. If you go, say, to 2020, for instance, somebody who's going to retire next year, well, this example would say, maybe they should have roughly half their money in stocks, and then the rest of it is sort of tucked away in things like bonds, which are typically safer type investments, and maybe some of these real assets, things like real estate, commodities. So the general principle, the longer you have until retirement, the more risk you want to take, more emphasis on risky type investments. The closer you get to today, to actually retiring, sort of the less you want to take. And again, that's just a general rule. Everybody's different. Now, we looked at this example earlier, right? The different rates of return, the 4, 6, 8%. The person in the green there, generating that 8% return, they're probably in one of these, in this mix that we looked at here a second ago, they're probably out there in the 2040, 2045, 2050 range. The person earning, say, 4%, the red line here, that person's probably doing something more like the 2020, maybe even the 2015 mix, a much more conservative mix. That's how those different rates of return, again, can affect your long-term results. In our system, you have, again, and we saw these earlier, you have 8 individual, what we call core investment options. This is kind of the do-it-yourself version. If you want to pick these individual pieces and set up your own custom mix, more or less in bonds or stocks or international, whatever, you can mix and match things however you want to. Or if you want, URS can do the mixing for you, and you can choose one of our target date funds. And you can choose between, say, the 2050, the 2045. Basically, the easy way to use the target date funds, well, two ways. One, take our investor profile questionnaire. It'll give you a recommended target fund. Or pick the target date fund that's closest to the year that you want to retire. Now, we have, for time's sake, we can't spend a lot of time talking about how these work, but we have some other webinars on our website that you can watch that talk specifically about how the investment options work and how the core funds work, how the target date funds work. So if you get a chance, if you want to know more about that, zip on over to the webinar page on our website, and you can watch or sign up for those at your convenience. When you're in retirement, how much can you spend? You may have heard there's kind of this 4% rule that's been out there that basically says, if you spend roughly 4% of your 401k balance and you maintain kind of a middle of the road type mix between risky and safe assets, 50-50, let's say, you can draw roughly 4% each year and you won't run out of money within a 30-year time period. That's the kind of the academic research, if you will. Or, you can use that as a general guideline. Or, again, you can use our calculator because you can basically tell our calculator, the future value savings calculator that we talked about earlier, you can basically say, you can put in there, how long do you want the money to last? And we'll give you a dollar amount, theoretically, on how much you could spend throughout retirement. Of course, is any of that guaranteed? Of course not. It's all projections and assumptions. But again, those are some tools that you can use when you get to retirement to help you figure out, for instance, how much you want to spend. Now, when you're in retirement, of course, you probably have big plans, right? If you've got that 400 to 900,000, let's hope, in your 401k, and you're thinking, wow, I'm going to go buy that really nice, that second house up in the woods, or I'm going to go buy a fancy new car. Remember that 401k money, it's got to last the rest of your life, and it's got to help cover some basic things like food and housing and medical care and clothing and transportation, all those things. So just because you wind up with these big dollars down the road, don't just automatically think, well, I won the lottery, I'm going to go do some crazy You still got to make this stuff last over 20, maybe 30 years in retirement, depending on how long you want to live. So keep that in the back of your mind too. And speaking of planning ahead, let me ask you this last question. So think about this for just a second. So in planning for your income in retirement, one of the things to consider always is, taxes, income taxes. So based on these little options here, how do you think you might be able to diversify your taxable income in retirement? In other words, are there ways to generate some tax-free money in retirement? Let me give you just a second here and see what you guys think about this. So yeah, overall, so there's this thing called a Roth savings account. The Roth IRAs, depending on your employer, you might have an option to invest in like a Roth 401k or a Roth 403b. Different providers offer different things. At URS, we offer the Roth IRA. When you get to retirement, money coming out of your 401k, or if you have other plans like the 457 or tradition, that's all taxable. You're going to pay state and federal income tax on it. Social Security, assuming you receive it, probably the bulk of it is also going to be taxable. So right there, you've got two big taxable retirement resources. So the only way potentially to have some tax-free money in retirement might be to start putting money into a Roth account now. So we'd encourage you to, think about the Roth. Again, this is planning ahead, looking down the road. I know I'm getting some pretty significant money from my Tier 2 401k. It's going to be taxable. If I'm in Social Security, I'm going to get that money as well, but it is also taxable. Maybe I want some tax-free money down the road in retirement. Again, we don't have time to go into the details, but we do have webinars on our website, again, that you can either watch at your leisure or sign up for in the future where we do talk more about the Roth. Once you're online in your account, the couple things to always keep in the back of your mind, because we, again, that two-legged stool, if you will, it's very important to keep track of your 401k, manage it wisely. What can you do online? You can be looking at your statements. You can check and see how your investment's doing. Maybe you need to make changes in the mix. You can increase how much you're saving or decrease. We have year-round open enrollment, so any contributions you're making yourself, you can change anytime you want to. And again, nobody's going to retire with too much money, so if you can bump up your savings each and every year, that's usually a wise thing to do. If you have some old IRA, 401k accounts from former employers, you can bring those over to URS, combine them with your 401k here. Your beneficiaries, we always encourage you to keep those updated. So if you get married or divorced, new kids, get later in life, new grandkids, you can update beneficiaries anytime you want, keep those current. You can also meet with myself, one of my colleagues, one of the retirement planning advisors here at URS, and we can walk you through a lot of this and help you make wise choices there. In fact, we offer one-on-one retirement planning sessions, and pretty much almost any retirement related question you want to ask, we can attempt to help you with. And we can give you advice on which investment options are better for you. We can give you specific advice on how much you should be saving. We can give you advice on should you be doing the Roth instead of the 401k. So if you need some help, we are here for you. It's free. You are welcome, obviously, to attend. Your spouse is welcome to attend as well if you want to. If you happen to be married, the way you sign up for these, log into your MyURS account, click on that Education tab over on the right, and then when that opens up, click on Individual Retirement Planning Sessions. You'll see this page. It'll show you the dates, times, locations where we're going to be. Pick one that works for you. We'll meet with you. It takes about an hour generally. And there are some things to bring as well. When you sign up, you'll get a list of the things that we encourage you to bring. It's not just a couple things, nothing too onerous or anything. If you happen to log in and you look and you're like, wow, there's nothing really convenient to me, there's nothing nearby. Mind you, we do these all over the state, so we do these everywhere. But if you happen to look that particular day and you're like, well, there's nothing really nearby, all the sessions look like they're full, we're always adding new sessions every week. So maybe check every Monday afternoon or Wednesday morning or whenever. Put a reminder on your calendar just to remind yourself to check. And then eventually, hopefully, we will be able to meet with you. Be glad to do that. Back to our big picture. Tier 2 401k. It's going to be that orange component, the savings plan. It's a portion of what we're going to do, or what we're going to use to hopefully replace our income in retirement. And it's a big piece, but it's a piece too you need to kind of stay on top of. And if you need help with that, again, we have webinars for you. We have printed materials. You can meet with us one-on-one. We would love to help you make good choices with your 401k. So if ever you need help with that, we are here.